Listen to me carefully. If the Alpha King of the Western Reaches ever offers his palm for a reading run, I made the fatal mistake of telling Eitan Freeman his future as a drunken joke. 3 prophecies came true. He is furious. And I am currently hiding for my life. My name is Roxanne Walker, and I am not a witch. I am not a seer, a clairvoyant, or a mystic blessed by the moon goddess. I am, or at least I was, a simple apothecary, living on the ragged edge of the sprawling Freeman territory in the year 1422. My daily routine consisted of grinding willow bark for headaches, mixing chamomile for sleepless pups, and occasionally reading tea leaves for the gullible village wives who wanted to know if their husbands were cheating. It was a harmless parlor trick, a way to earn a few extra copper coins to keep my hearth burning during the brutal winters. I never expected those parlor tricks to make me a hunted woman. It all began on the night of the autumn equinox. Our village of Oakhaven was hosting the annual harvest feast, a massive celebration of food firelight and far too much spiced mead. It was a rare occasion where the Lycan nobility descended from their mountain fortress to mingle with the common folk. That night, the air practically vibrated with tension because he was there. Eitan Freeman, the Alpha King. Eitan was a terrifying force of nature, a man who had won his crown through a brutal succession war that left the rivers running red. He was brutally handsome in that rugged, untamed way, pitch-black hair, piercing amber eyes that seemed to strip away your secrets, and a scar cutting through his left eyebrow that only added to his menacing aura. He sat at the head table draped in heavy furs, looking thoroughly bored and dangerous, flanked by his hulking enforcer and right-hand man Giorgio Cross. I had consumed entirely too much elderberry wine. My friend, a baker's daughter named Clara, nudged my ribs. Her cheeks flushed with liquid courage. "Roxanne," she whispered, giggling. "I double dare you to go up there and offer to read the king's fortune. Tell him he's going to marry a fat pig farmer's daughter." "I am not going anywhere near that man," I slurred, shaking my head. "He looks like he'd snap my neck for breathing his air." "Coward," Clara teased, sliding a silver piece onto the wooden table. "I'll give you this if you do it. Just a quick palm reading. What's the worst he can do at a public festival? The laws of hospitality protect you." The silver coin gleamed in the firelight. It was enough to buy a month's worth of firewood. Blame the wine, blame the poverty, or blame my own sheer stupidity. But I stood up. I smoothed down my linen apron, pasted on my most confident, mystical smile, and wove my way through the crowded, raucous hall toward the high table. The noise died down as I approached. Lycan guards stepped into my path, their hands resting on the pommels of their swords, but Eitan raised a single calloused hand to halt them. His amber eyes locked onto mine. The sheer predatory weight of his gaze almost sobered me up instantly. "Speak, human," Eitan rumbled. His voice was like grinding stones, deep and resonant. "Why do you interrupt my feast?" "My king," I said, dropping into a clumsy curtsy. "I am Roxanne Walker, a humble seer. The spirits of the harvest have guided me to you tonight. For a single silver coin, I can peer into the veil of your future." A tense silence fell over the hall. Giorgio Cross sneered, leaning down to whisper something in the king's ear. But Eitan didn't break eye contact with me. Slowly, a dark, mocking smirk touched the corner of his lips. He thought it was a joke, an entertaining jest from a drunken peasant. "Very well, Roxanne Walker," Eitan said, leaning forward and extending his massive scarred hand, palm up on the oak table. "Tell me my fate. But know this, if your spirits bore me, I will have you in the stocks by morning." I swallowed hard. I stepped forward, and gently took his hand. It was burning hot, radiating the unnatural heat of a werewolf. I traced the lines of his palm, my mind racing. I couldn't tell him something boring, or he'd punish me. I couldn't tell him something insulting, or he'd kill me. I had to make up prophecies that sounded incredibly dramatic, entirely impossible, and deeply poetic, so he would brush them off as mere theatrical nonsense. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and let the theatricality take over. I lowered my voice to a haunting whisper that carried through the silent hall. 3 omens shadow your path, Alpha King, I intoned, channeling every mystic I had ever read about. The first, the silver river that feeds your lands, shall run black as pitch before the next full moon, choking the life from the valley. I heard a few gasps from the crowd. The Silverweed River was a sacred, crystal-clear water source. It turning black was ecologically and magically impossible. "Go on," Aiton commanded, his voice dripping with dry amusement. The second omen. I continued, tracing a random scar on his thumb. "A crown of ash shall fall upon the head of your most trusted confidant, marking him for a trial by fire." I didn't look at Giorgio Cross, but I could feel his glare burning a hole in the side of my head. "And the third?" Aitan asked. I looked up, meeting his amber eyes. "You, my king, are known for your impenetrable heart and iron will, but the third omen says this: you will bleed willingly and deeply for a woman who wears no scent of the wolf." The hall erupted into a mixture of nervous laughter and outright scoffing. The Alpha King bleeding for a human woman. It was the most absurd, ridiculous thing I could have possibly said. Aiton Freeman despised humans. He only tolerated us in his territory because we paid taxes and farmed the land. Aitan chuckled a dark, low sound that sent shivers down my spine. He tossed a heavy gold coin onto the table, far more than the silver I had asked for. "A vivid imagination apothecary," he declared loudly, ensuring the whole hall could hear. "Keep the gold. Buy yourself some better wine, for your spirits have clearly made you mad." The crowd laughed. I curtsied again, snatched the gold and practically sprinted back to Clara. We spent the rest of the night drinking and laughing at my brazen survival. It was a fantastic joke, a brilliant story to tell my grandchildren. Until, of course, 3 days later. I had a terrible headache the morning the screaming started. I was in my cottage grinding dried mint when the village bells began to clang wildly. It was the warning bell usually reserved for bandit raids or rogue wolf attacks. I dropped my pestle and ran outside, joining the panicked throngs of villagers rushing toward the center of Oakhaven. The river. The river. A fisherman was shouting his face, pale, falling to his knees in the dirt. I pushed my way through the crowd until I reached the banks of the Silverweed River. My breath caught in my throat, and a cold dread settled into my stomach like a lead weight. The water, usually a sparkling, pristine silver blue, was flowing as thick and black as spilled ink. Dead trout and freshwater eels floated to the surface, their scales stained with the dark, foul-smelling sludge. It was horrifying. "What witchcraft is this?" the village elder demanded, clutching his walking stick. A regiment of the king's royal guards arrived on horseback. Within the hour, their dire wolves snapping at the air. The captain of the guard rode up to the elder, his expression grim. "Evacuate the banks," he ordered. There has been a catastrophic collapse at the Dunsworth iron mines up north. An underground reservoir of coal slurry and toxic slag broke through the cavern walls and flooded the river's source. It wasn't magic. It was an industrial accident, a terrible, rare, tragic accident. But as the villagers murmured in shock, a few eyes turned toward me. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd. The seer, the prophecy. She said the river would run black. I backed away, my heart hammering against my ribs. It's a coincidence, I whispered to myself, turning and walking briskly back to my cottage. A freak geological coincidence. That's all. I barricaded myself in my home for the next week, refusing to see clients. I told myself that the king was a rational man, well as rational as a giant shape-shifting warlord could be. He would know about the mine collapse. He wouldn't attribute a mining disaster to a drunken human's party trick. But then, the second omen fell. It was a fortnight after the festival. The moon was waxing, inching closer to the full moon I had mentioned in my reading. I was in the market square buying flour when a royal messenger rode into the village, shouting for the local healer to gather supplies and make for the king's fortress immediately. "What happened?" Clara asked, grabbing the reins of the messenger's horse. "An ambush at the northern watchtower." The messenger gasped, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. "Rogue wolves. They set the tower ablaze with pitch." "Was anyone hurt?" I asked, a sick feeling rising in my throat. "Lord Giorgio Cross," the messenger replied. "He fought off a dozen of them to let the younger guards escape, but he was trapped inside when the roof collapsed. The burning timber came down on him." The messenger swallowed hard. He survived thanks to his lichen healing. But the burning roof beams, they crushed his helmet. He was pulled from the rubble wearing nothing but a crown of glowing white ash. The sack of flour slipped from my hands, hitting the cobblestones and bursting open in a cloud of white dust. "A crown of ash shall fall upon the head of your most trusted confidant, marking him for a trial by fire." The words I had spoken, words I had pulled out of thin air, just to sound dramatic, echoed in my mind with deafening clarity. People in the market were staring at me now, not with the mild curiosity they had after the river incident, but with outright terror. To the medieval mind, coincidence didn't exist twice. I wasn't just a lucky guesser anymore. I was a witch, or worse, I had cursed them. "Roxanne," Clara whispered, stepping away from me, her eyes wide with fear. I didn't wait to see if she would turn on me. I turned and sprinted back to my apothecary. I locked the heavy oak door and frantically began stuffing my leather satchel with dried meats bandages, a few vials of healing tinctures, and the heavy gold coin Aiton had given me. If the river was a coincidence, Giorgio's crown of ash was the nail in my coffin. Aiton Freeman was not a man who believed in chance. He would realize that 2 of the 3 prophecies had come true with terrifying precision. And what was the third, that he would bleed for a human woman? He wouldn't wait for that to happen. He would see me as a threat, a dark witch who was manipulating his fate, or a seer too dangerous to be left alive. He would hunt me down to ensure the third prophecy never came to pass. Just as I tied the straps of my satchel, the ground beneath my feet trembled. The heavy rhythmic thud of armored boots marching in unison echoed down the narrow dirt path leading to my cottage. I crept to the window and peered through the wooden shutters. My blood ran cold. A dozen elite royal guards had surrounded my home, and at the front of the pack stood Aiton Freeman himself. He wasn't in his ceremonial furs today. He wore dark leather battle armor, a massive broad sword strapped to his back. His amber eyes were fixed on my front door, burning with a lethal intensity. Standing beside him was Giorgio Cross, one side of his face heavily bandaged, his armor scorched black soot, and ash still clinging to his hair. "Roxanne Walker." Aiton's voice boomed, rattling the glass in my windows. "Open this door by order of the Alpha King." I didn't answer. I backed away from the window, my breathing shallow and ragged. "Break it down." Aiton commanded coldly. The sound of a heavy battering ram hitting my reinforced oak door sent splinters flying into the room. I had a trapdoor in my kitchen, a small hidden cellar, where I kept root vegetables during the winter, which connected to an old drainage tunnel leading out into the nearby woods. I threw open the rug, hoisted the trapdoor, and scrambled down into the damp darkness, just as my front door shattered inward with a deafening crash. "Search the house," I heard Giorgio snarl above me. "Find the witch. The king wants her alive." I didn't wait to hear more. I pulled the trapdoor shut, locked it from below, and began to run blindly through the dark, muddy tunnel. I was no longer a simple apothecary. I was a fugitive, fleeing from the most powerful alpha in the realm, all because I couldn't keep my mouth shut after a few cups of elderberry wine. I was running for my life, and the third prophecy was still waiting in the shadows. Mud clung to my boots, heavy as iron, as I dragged myself out of the drainage pipe and collapsed into the dense, thorny underbrush of the whispering woods. Behind me, the muffled shouts of the king's guards echoing from my apothecary faded into the distance, replaced by the pounding of my own heart and the ominous crackle of thunder overhead. Running from a pack of fully realized lycanthropes was a fool's errand. Their senses were legendary. A werewolf could track a drop of spilled blood across 3 counties in a snowstorm. If I just ran, Aiton Freeman would have my neck in his jaws before midnight. I needed a disguise not for my face, but for my scent. My hands shook as I unbuckled my leather satchel. My apothecary training was the only weapon I had left. I pulled out a handful of dried camphor-crushed foxglove and pungent sulphurweed. I found a shallow puddle of rainwater, mixed the herbs into the mud, and ruthlessly smeared the foul-smelling paste over my pulse, points, my neck, my wrists, behind my knees. It burned my skin and smelled like a rotting corpse rolled in pine needles. But it would confuse their olfactory senses long enough for me to gain some ground. For 3 days and 3 nights, I lived like a hunted animal. I moved only during the torrential downpours that masked my trail, surviving on strips of dried venison and rain caught in broad oak leaves. My destination was the ruins of Ethelgard, a crumbling stone fortress from the First Lycan War. It sat atop a jagged cliffside, miles outside the Freeman territory, surrounded by deep ravines filled with wild wolfsbane. The toxic pollen in the air was a natural deterrent for Lycans. It gave them agonizing migraines and clouded their tracking abilities. It was the perfect place to hide. On the 4th evening, the storm finally broke, leaving a heavy, suffocating fog hanging over the ruined courtyard of Ethelgard. I had built a small, smokeless fire in the corner of what used to be a grand dining hall, wrapping myself tightly in a stolen wool blanket. I was exhausted, starving, and terrified. I stared into the glowing embers, desperately trying to figure out how I was going to spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. Then a sound shattered the silence. It wasn't the heavy synchronized marching of the Royal Guard. It was a single deliberate footstep on loose gravel. I froze, my breath hitching in my chest. I slowly reached for the small iron paring knife I used to cut herbs, my knuckles turning white. The sulphur and camphor was a clever trick apothecary. A voice rumbled from the shadows. It was deep, gravelly, and vibrating with an undercurrent of lethal fury. "But you underestimated my patience, and you left a single silver coin on the floor of your cottage, the one Clara gave you." A towering figure stepped out of the fog and into the dim light of my dying fire. Aiton Freeman. He was alone. No guards. No Giorgio Cross. Just the Alpha King, wearing travel-stained leather armor and a heavy dark cloak, his amber eyes glowing with a terrifying, predatory intensity. I scrambled backward until my spine hit the cold, damp stone of the fortress wall. "How?" I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. "How did you get past the wolfsbane?" Aiton tapped the side of his temple, a dark, humorless smirk crossing his face. "With a blistering headache and a great deal of rage. You are a remarkably difficult woman to find, Roxanne Walker. Most humans would have surrendered or died of exposure by now." He took a slow, menacing step forward. The sheer physical presence of the man was suffocating. He radiated heat and power, trapping me in the corner like a mouse under the paw of a lion. "I didn't curse you," I blurted out, dropping the pathetic iron knife. It clattered against the stone floor. "I swear to you on my life, I am not a witch. I don't have magic. Do not lie to me," Aiton snarled, closing the distance between us in a fraction of a second. He slammed a heavy hand against the stone wall, inches from my head, boxing me in. "The river runs black. My commander nearly burns to ash. You stood in my hall and spoke my doom into existence, and you expect me to believe it was a parlor trick. It was a drunken joke." I cried, tears of sheer panic finally spilling over my eyelashes. "I made it up. I wanted the silver coin to buy firewood. The river was a mining accident, and the tower was an ambush. It's just a horrible, impossible coincidence." Aiton leaned in his face, inches from mine. I could smell the rain leather and blood on him. "I do not believe in coincidence," he whispered dangerously. "If you are not a witch, Roxanne, then you are a spy. You knew about the mine. You knew about the ambush at the watchtower. You are working with the traitors who are trying to dismantle my kingdom, and you used that festival to mock me." My eyes widened in horror. A spy? He thought I was part of a rebellion. "No, I don't know any traitors. You have to believe me." Before I could finish my desperate plea, a slow, mocking applause echoed through the ruined hall. "A brilliant deduction, Your Majesty, though you give the human far too much credit." Aiton whipped around his hand, flying to the hilt of his broadsword in a blur of motion. I pressed myself flat against the wall, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Stepping out from behind a collapsed stone pillar was Kaelin Vane, a rogue alpha from the northern steppes, flanked by half a dozen heavily armed mercenaries. Kaelin's face was painted with the blue woad of the northern clans, and his eyes were completely devoid of sanity. These were the rebels, the ones who had caused the mining disaster and set the watchtower ablaze. "Kaelin!" Aiton growled his voice, dropping into an inhuman guttural register. The air around him seemed to crackle with violent energy as his lichen nature surged to the surface. "You coward! You hide behind sabotage and arson. I call it strategy." Kaelin sneered, drawing a long, jagged blade that glinted sickeningly in the moonlight. "We rigged the Dunsworth mines to cut off your water supply. We burned the tower to eliminate Giorgio Cross. We have been planning this coup for a year." Kaelin shifted his gaze to me, a cruel smile twisting his lips. And then this foolish little apothecary stands up at a feast and accidentally guesses our entire strategy in front of the whole court. You gave us quite a scare, human. We thought we had a leak. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The prophecies, they weren't magic. They were the accidental unveiling of a highly classified treason plot. I had literally guessed a rebellion into existence. She was a convenient distraction. Kaelin continued stepping into the courtyard as his mercenaries fanned out, surrounding us. "You abandoned your royal guard and chased a human into the Wolfsbane fields alone. You practically handed me your crown, Aiton." "Come and take it then," Aiton roared. The fight erupted with explosive violence. Eitan moved with terrifying speed, his broadsword clearing the distance in a silver arc. He clashed with the mercenaries, a whirlwind of muscle steel and blood. Despite the wolfsbane in the air clearly affecting him, the Alpha King was a god of war. He cleaved through the first two attackers before they could even raise their shields, but there were too many of them, and Kalen was waiting for an opening. I crouched against the wall, paralyzed by fear. I needed to run, but my legs refused to obey. One of the mercenaries, seeing me cowering, broke away from the fray. "Kill the seer," Kalen ordered. "Leave no loose ends." The mercenary lunged toward me, a heavy battle-axe raised high above his head. I screamed, throwing my arms up to shield my face, bracing for the inevitable agonizing end. A deafening roar shook the very foundations of the ruins. Eitan abandoned his duel with Kalen. He threw himself across the courtyard with reckless abandon, putting himself directly between me and the falling axe. He didn't have time to raise his sword. He didn't have time to block. Slick. The sound of the blade tearing through flesh and armor was sickening. Eitan grunted a harsh, breathless sound as the mercenary's axe buried itself deep into his left shoulder. My breath stopped. Eitan didn't fall. With a snarl that sounded entirely wolf, he reached up, grabbed the mercenary by the throat with his bare hand, and crushed his windpipe in a single, brutal motion. The man dropped dead at our feet. Eitan ripped the axe from his own shoulder, a massive spray of dark red blood painting the stone floor in front of me. You will bleed willingly and deeply for a woman who wears no scent of the wolf. The third omen, the final prophecy. It hung in the air between us, undeniable and absolute. He had taken a killing blow meant for a human peasant. Kalen roared in fury and charged, but the distraction had bought enough time. The sound of howling tore through the night air, not rogue wolves, but the deep, unified battle cry of the Royal Guard. Giorgio Cross, his face still heavily bandaged, stormed into the courtyard, leading a dozen elite Lycan warriors. They had tracked their king. The tide of battle turned in an instant. The rogues were slaughtered, and Kalen Vane was brought to his knees in chains. Eitan dropped his sword, his knees buckling as the blood loss and the toxic wolfsbane finally took their toll. He collapsed onto the cold stone. "Eitan!" I screamed, abandoning my fear. I dropped to my knees beside him, my hands automatically flying to the massive jagged wound in his shoulder. It was deep, and silver powder coated the edges of the mercenary's blade, poison to a Lycan. "Giorgio, I need water, clean cloth, and a fire now." I barked orders at the towering commander, entirely forgetting that I was a fugitive speaking to nobility. My hands were slick with the king's blood, but my mind was terrifyingly clear. I packed the wound with the remaining yarrow and spiderwebs from my satchel to stem the bleeding, working frantically to neutralize the silver. Eitan's amber eyes flickered open. He looked up at me, his face pale, his breath rattling in his chest. His gaze was no longer filled with fury, but with a strange possessive intensity that sent a fresh wave of shivers down my spine. "You," he rasped, coughing violently. "You are an absolute menace, Roxanne Walker. Shut up and hold still, or you're going to bleed to death on this filthy floor." I snapped back, pressing my weight onto the bandages. Eitan actually laughed, a weak, breathless sound. "The third omen." He whispered, his heavy hand reaching up to grip my blood-stained wrist. "It seems my fate is bound to you, after all, little seer." He passed out before I could reply. I am writing this now from a massive, velvet-draped chamber within the highest tower of the Freeman Fortress. I am not in a dungeon. I am not dead. Instead, the Alpha King has publicly declared me his royal oracle, and placed me under his personal, terrifyingly close protection. Giorgio Cross now bows to me in the hallways, and the entire kingdom whispers tales of the human witch who saved the king's life after predicting a rebellion. I am trapped in a gilded cage of my own accidental making. Aiton Freeman watches me with eyes that say he knows exactly what I am, a fraud who got lucky. But he also watches me with an undeniable burning hunger that suggests he has no intention of ever letting me go. I told the Alpha King his fortune as a joke, and now I am living the punchline. Did you enjoy this wild tale of accidental prophecies, royal intrigue, and dangerous romance? If Roxanne's terrifyingly lucky survival and the Alpha King's brooding obsession kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button, share this story with your fellow fantasy drama lovers, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more epic, suspense-filled stories. Drop a comment below. Would you have risked the prophecy for a silver coin?